Use completing the square to solve x squared minus 8x plus 2 is equal to 0. There are three ways to solve a quadratic equation. The first way was looked at in the previous exercise, and that was factoring. But some quadratic equations can't be factored, and they can be solved by completing the square, and that's what we're going to do on this video. The third way to solve a quadratic equation is to use the quadratic formula, and that'll be looked at in the next exercise. So let's start out with writing the problem. X squared minus 8x plus 2 is equal to 0. Here are the steps associated with solving an equation like this by completing the square. Step 1 is to move the constant term, and here is the constant term 2, over to the right-hand side. And the way you do that is you subtract 2 from both sides of this equation. When you subtract 2 from the left-hand side of the equation, you get x squared minus 8x. When you subtract 2 from the right-hand side of the equation, you get negative 2. That's step 1. Second step is to take half of the coefficient of the linear term, square it, and add it to both sides of the equation. So here is the linear term, negative 8x, and the coefficient of the linear term is negative 8. So half of negative 8 is negative 4, and negative 4 squared is 16. 16 gets added to both sides of this equation. So it's going to be x squared minus 8x plus 16 is equal to negative 2 plus 16. If you add 16 to the left-hand side, you also have to add it to the right-hand side. Now, that last step may seem a little bit opaque, but the reason it's done is so that this quadratic right here will be a perfect square. So this can be factored into x minus 4, the quantity squared. You should do the FOIL to check that. X times x gives you x squared. Negative 4 times negative 4 gives you positive 16. And then when you do the outside and inside terms, you get a negative 4x plus a negative 4x. Well, that's going to be a negative 8x. So that works out to be x minus 4 squared. And the last thing here is negative 2 plus 16 is equal to 14. The next step is to take the square root of both sides. Remember, we're trying to solve for x, so we take the square root of the left-hand side and the square root of the right-hand side. When we take the square root of the left-hand side, we get x minus 4. When we take the square root of the right-hand side, we get plus or minus the square root of 14. Last step in solving this equation is to add 4 to both sides of this equation. When you add 4 to the left-hand side of the equation, you get just x. When you add 4 to the right-hand side of the equation, you get 4 plus or minus the square root of 14. And that right there is the solution. Those are the two solutions to this particular quadratic equation. I can tell from this particular solution that this could not have been factored. It has to either be solved by completing the square or the quadratic formula. Now, at this point, you could take the two solutions, if you wanted to check, and the two solutions are x is equal to 4 minus the square root of 14. That's one solution. And the other solution is 4 plus the square root of 14. You could take both of those and plug them for x into this original equation, and you would get 0. It wouldn't be quite as pretty as was on the previous page, but you would indeed get 0 when you did so for both. So both of those are solutions to this particular quadratic equation.